Good evening, everyone. We're so glad to have you joining us again for another program in our series, The Hermit's Journal. Also a pilgrim at that point. We are beginning a new section, which we have entitled The Time Between. Between hermitages, that is. A time of waiting for the curtain to go up on the unknown future. And where I was waiting was in the monastery of Santa Clara in Canton, Ohio. And you saw several pictures of the outside of that monastery where I had spent 30 years. And you also saw a picture of the group of women sisters that I lived with at that time. And within that group was also Father Stan, if you had very sharp eyes. But
I don't know that they needed to be that sharp. He didn't look at all like the other sisters.
There was a difference. These presentations, as always, are being broadcast on Doves for Peace channel at 8 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, 3 p.m. Eastern Time in the U.S. You are welcome to join us weekly at this time, or if it does not fit your schedule, you can pick up the program when it is put up on YouTube by our good friend David Holmes. Key in A Hermit's Journal, and the programs will come up and they will all be numbered.
Well, last week we completed the account of Karen's 3-month trial, her first foray into eremitic life from living in community in the monastery of Santa Clara for over 30 years. She did this 3-month trial in the small village of Ansted, West Virginia, on a very, very simple little building that had been on church property there in Ansted. And now she has returned to her monastery with the one central question that motivated her 3-month trial being clearly answered, but still a host of other questions that remained very ambiguous or actually wrapped in mystery. Karen was certain of her calling to become a hermit by now, and she was ready to apply for a 3-year period of exclaustration, a formal permission that is secured from Rome to live outside the monastery while still remaining a member of her order. Most of the unanswered questions had to do with where, when, and how. Now, during our presentations, we have been helped enormously because Karen has shared with us portions of the actual prayer journal that she was keeping at the time. And of course, she continued this journaling, and very graciously, she's willing to continue sharing those so that we can really enter into the experience with her of this period, this time of discernment and trial and real struggle to learn and accept and move in the direction that she felt she was being asked to move by God Himself. So, Karen, we've accompanied you back to the monastery. In our last presentation last week, you actually came back to the monastery where you realized even more fully, profoundly, very experientially and emotionally how you really no longer fit into that style of regulated community living. So once back at the monastery, what would you say were how would you articulate your immediate goals at that time?
there were things that needed to be taken care of if I were to continue in hermit life. One of the things I most wanted was to touch base with my Jesuit guide, Father Tim. He is the one who advised that I do the 3-month trial, and I wanted to report back to him, as it were, as well as to meet with a few other wisdom figures that were important to me and whose advice meant so much to me. Among them were a few of the elders within the community itself. In my life, I hoped that by leaving all my stuff in place in Anstead, it would sort of influence God to let me return. As it turned out, it wasn't God that I needed to influence, but the bishop.
Kind of brazen but misguided.
Well, I guess. On March 31st, I wrote this in my journal. It was still Easter week. And I wrote, "It's still snowing wildly." If you remember, it was springtime when I left West Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to drive over to see my father, but my hat and boots and gloves are all in West Virginia. And I just got a letter from Bishop Schmidt, the ordinary of the Diocese of Wheeling-Charleston in West Virginia. And the answer was no permission was given to continue to stay on diocesan property in Anstead. So that ended that option. And I highly doubted that it would be pleasing to him or to the Chancellor of the Diocese, Father Nash, if I went to Spencer. Even though it wasn't on diocesan property, I'd still be in that diocese where I'm clearly not wanted. I knew that Sister Gert and Father Weber and the dear folks at the Anstead Mission would all be disappointed. I'd hoped to stay at least through June, but it looked like I'd better try to move on sooner, which meant an application through Father Rock in Hazard, Kentucky, to the ordinary of the Lexington Diocese. And I wrote, "Lord, your will is becoming clearer, it seems." I looked over the Hazard photographs again, and the TV studio didn't look quite so forbidding as I remembered it, for I noted that there were trees around it, and the road up to it didn't seem quite so formidable. But still, I would definitely need a 4-wheel drive vehicle if I were to make that my hermitage.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like you're starting to make that mental adjustment. You know, when you look at pictures that at first you thought were thoroughly frightening, and you say, well, that's not so bad. Maybe that's not so bad.
Yeah,
you know?
maybe.
But this is a profound disappointment for you. This is a
right.
real, maybe something that at the edges of your mind you didn't totally unexpect, but one that you were really hoping would go in another direction. So you come back to the monastery quite certain that you are being called to hermit life, that in a sense, that central issue is resolved. But now you come to this really amazing disappointment. What meaning did you attach? How did you interpret this turn of events in light of, you know, your own understanding, your own newfound conviction about where you were supposed to go? Because this is obviously a closed door.
very closed. When two bishops say no, it's pretty clear. On April 1st, April Fool's Day, the Saturday after Easter, I wrote this. I tried to pray in choir, but I'm too distracted by the presence of others. So I have been sitting on the floor here in my room with my Paschal candle for my focus, and a picture of a Russian beggar woman as a symbol of where I am. For the first time since I've been back, I found some measure of the timeless prayer space that is my cherished joy in solitude. I have some grieving to do over what will never be again at Anstead. I'm glad I didn't know I couldn't continue solitary life there when I left. It came to such a beautiful climax with Easter celebrations and will always be a shrine of holy memory, a honeymoon time never to be relived. Ah, Lord, how can I thank you for that blessed time, for the light as well as the dark. You gave me a taste, at least, of spring in those final days of glorious weather, the daffodils blowing on the hillside, the water of the Mill Creek Falls tumbling in sparkling purity to the deep catch basin on Easter Sunday. It seems I must give up seeing the rhododendron in bloom in June. If I can, I'll probably be moving stuff to Kentucky in May, if I get permission from that diocese, and that Mayor Gorman, the owner of the TV station, doesn't change his mind. These two things need to be clarified, and then I need to go about finding a good vehicle. And again that evening I wrote, I've just been sitting here by the Paschal candle, grieving the loss of Anstead and the sweet joy I knew there with you, my love. I feel so utterly wretched here, physically, emotionally, and spiritually awful. It'll be a bit more bearable once I have some assurance of where I am going. But right now, I just feel all torn up.
Sounds pretty devastating.
Yes, people looking at me wouldn't see it, but readers of my journal would know it.
Right, and that leads me to the question that I had. Readers of your journal, but your journal is not a public document, at least not until now. But I mean, at that time, this was a pretty, like I said, devastating. This is a letdown of the First Order, and you say as much, that you are feeling totally deflated by this. So I guess you were sharing it in your journal, but how were you? Is that how you were processing this experience, or were you able to share that with some of the other sisters in the community at the time? How did you process this experience?
Well, I felt like I had to process it pretty much internally, because I knew that the sisters, by and large, really didn't want me to leave the community.
Mm-hmm.
So if I said, well, the Bishop of Anstead of West Virginia wouldn't allow me to return, they'd say, oh, that's too bad. You'll have to stay.
You'll just have to stay.
That wasn't exactly what I needed to hear at that moment. But I dealt with it in large part by taking action. And on April 2nd, which was Low Sunday, the Sunday following Easter, also called Sabbato in Albus, which means White Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
And I noted both those names in my journal and wrote, both are appropriate names. Snow is on the ground, and I feel very low. I tried to pray in choir, but when my legs got so cold, it just hurt so much. So I came back to my room. And I took action by putting a call through to Father Rock in Hazard, West Virginia. And he wasn't able to take it. But that evening, Rock returned my call just before supper. And he was so encouraging in his approach. He's going to be seeing the bishop tomorrow morning. So he wanted some vital statistics about me to present. How many years I've been in community and so forth. He seemed to be particularly interested that I was able to do spiritual direction, for that could meet a real need in the new diocese. I said I was drawn to the Hazard area because of the need I felt in the area. And he added, and the need of the friars.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not uncommon, where the sisters and the friars nourish one another. I'd felt that too, but it wasn't my place, at least at that point, to say so. I sensed some mutual ministry as possible. He asked which of the places I had seen seemed most possible, so I said the TV station seemed to offer the kind of seclusion that I wanted. But I asked him if he had ever seen inside, and to let me know. He said the one time he saw it, it looked rather torn up, and he didn't know what the present family living there had done to it. It was being used as a place to stash homeless people.
Mm-hmm.
He also mentioned that he was doing a retreat over at Pine Mountain, which was a beautiful place he thought I'd love, and it had a couple of abandoned little buildings on it. So, love, maybe all you ask is that I'm willing to go to Hazard, despite my fears of the TV station, and you will actually settle me somewhere less fearsome. So maybe there will be water before I hit the bottom of the pool. Elsewhere I had written that I had jumped off the diving board without taking notice that there was very little water in the pool.
Mm-hmm.
I've jumped off, and I'm aiming at being there by late May. I hope Joan Marie, my abbess, will dig out the forms I need to write for exclaustration by tomorrow. But at the same time, I noticed the quote that was at the top of the page of the journal that I was using. And it went like this. It was written by Saniya Sali, a Syrian poet. I have willed to go forward and have not advanced beyond the borders of my grave.
Stark.
Yes.
The borders of one's grave. For an Easter Sunday, a Sunday in Easter, this is a pretty somber appraisal
Yes.
of your situation. And while it's not conveying, your journals are not conveying total despair, they are conveying a sense of misgivings, a sense of apprehension, a sense of profound discomfort with your situation. And maybe a sense that, were you asking yourself, well, maybe I was just a little too reckless? This imagery of jumping off into the pool with very little water, is exactly the opposite image of a well-considered, well-thought-out, well-discerned course of action. This
Yes.
is more like an impromptu,
Run without looking?
Yes, run without looking, and then realize in mid-step or in mid-leap that what you've done is quite reckless.
Oh, yes.
And I'm wondering if maybe there isn't a little bit of that. Whatever it is, it really does strike me, and it seems apparent in the pages that there's that inner harmony, both inner and outer harmony is really not present right now, and that you looking back with fondness and maybe even a little bit of nostalgia is beginning with regard to Anstead and your time there by Mill Creek, and a profound sense of being at 6 and 7s here, that you're really not at all at ease, either inwardly or outwardly.
Yes.
So, what, in view of all that, what did you feel was being asked of you by God? What did you feel coming through as being what you need, how you needed to respond at this point?
Well, almost as always, it was something from Scripture that sort of picked me up by the scruff of the neck and gave me some solid ground to stand on. April 3rd, Monday, was the day assigned for the celebration of the Feast of the Annunciation that year, since the 25th had fallen during the Easter season.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote in my journal early that morning, "It's cold and rainy." Quote, "Nothing is impossible with God, even to influencing a bishop to look favorably on my living as a hermit in his diocese. I want to say, let Rock be successful in convincing the bishop to let me come to Southeast Kentucky. But what you really want when they meet, really want of me, is to be totally open and accepting of whatever happens when they meet today. You have called me to the hermit life. You will provide both the place and the means." And later in that day, I jotted down, "It was a quiet and deep prayer experience through Mass. I am reaching for inner harmony, which can say of anything, this too is of God." It is an important day symbolically, the Annunciation, for Jesus and Mary's own deep yes are remembered today. I wrote my petition for the 3 years exclaustration, even though I don't know where I can go yet. Joan Marie and I discussed things, and we've already asked the caretaker to keep a lookout for a good vehicle, which the community will help me purchase in return for my giving them my father's car. So those things are, as it were, on the road. Or rather, I'm off the diving board. I'm surprised how easy it was for me to request exclaustration for 3 years. To ask it all at one time would have seemed so traumatic. But now it's simply the necessary next step in the ongoing process of moving into eremitical life. To request only 1 year actually feels constricted, time-wise. 3 years gives me a sense of space and freedom to grow and deepen and become. My friend Patty, young woman that I often counseled, came to visit me that day, and she was quite interested in what I was about. And I realized that she comes from the heart, and her feeling questions really stumped me because I really hadn't dealt with them. I keep wondering about Rock's meeting with his bishop today. I'm afraid to hope to be open to allowing me to live in the diocese after 3 bishops have turned me down. The first bishop when I went there to West Virginia, and then the bishop who took his place, and then the bishop of the diocese where the monastery was located, the Diocese of Youngstown, Bishop Malone. He also said emphatically and with no questions asked, "No, you cannot live as a hermit in my diocese." So, if I can't go to Kentucky, I'll truly be faced with a blank wall, as I was last September when I learned I couldn't go to Cedars of Peace because they had no additional cabins empty. You most unexpectedly opened a door for me then. You'll certainly do it for me again. And the next day, I wrote, "So it's cloudy again today. A solid week of gray days. This is northeastern Ohio. I'm tired, but I need prayer even more." And this word, as it were, came to me. The Spirit of the Lord blows where it will, and blows me along with it. It's scary to be so tumbled about and out of control. Until I hear from Rock, I live with a big question mark regarding Kentucky. But in my fear, I ask like Nicodemus, how can such a thing happen? To be born again. Mary asked a very similar question, but with a very different attitude. She believed it would happen, but needed to know what was required of her. What must I do? Actually, all that was asked was her consent. I'm feeling depressed and nervous and generally wretched. This cold, gray, wet day after day gets to me. It's only been a week today since I've been back, and it feels like forever.
The images of it's really into the images of Nicodemus and Mary both, and their response to what is being asked of them. Their response is a how. How's this going to happen? Nicodemus wants to know, how can a man be born again? And Mary's asking, how can a child be born without human intercourse? The how questions are our kinds of questions. They're very cerebral. They're very mind-centered questions. They're very practically oriented. It's the technicalities. How is all this going to happen? Whereas the difference that Karen perceived in the response of Nicodemus and the response of Mary is, although Mary asked the question, Mary's response is from her heart. She doesn't understand how this is going to happen, but she just says, basically, let it be. Let it be as you say. And really, this is what is in large measure so difficult about the spiritual life, but particularly about the eremitic life, is that we're not asked to figure out the details. We're asked to simply open our lives to be the conduit for God, to simply to say yes to what is being asked, and trust that if God has promised this, if God has presented us with this, that the details will work themselves out. But precisely where the problem is for all of us with that is that we're not in control. We're not controlling the situation. And this is not the first time that we visit the issues of control that you've spoken about a number of times in your 3-month trial. And they're not peculiar to Karen, although Karen has exemplified many, many times already how those issues come up when we're in a spiritual struggle, in a discernment period, in a time of profound searching, that we're asked to let go of the reins. We're asked to get out of the driver's seat. We're asked to relinquish our control and allow God to be in control. And that is always, always an uncomfortable. There are moments when maybe we do experience some kind of relief, at not in the sense that it's not all on us. But for the most part, we feel very insecure when we're not the ones calling the shots.
Yes.
And I think this is adding to this time of, on the one hand, deep consolation.
Yes.
And we talk about that dynamic, those experience of deep spiritual consolation when we know that God has addressed us in a very loving and affirming and uplifting way. But the converse is that then there's those moments of desolation when we feel that God has brought us to this point and suddenly we look around and we feel abandoned and that we're on our own to figure out how it all has to come out. And we're really not, but that's the feeling we have. That's the sense we have. And it's a profoundly disconcerting experience. It's one of deep, deep sense of desolation, of being abandoned, so to speak, and left without an escape.
Yeah, left wondering, what do I do next?
In this moment, as always, the scriptures throughout the 3-month trial, and I would expect that even though you're back at the monastery, you're still able to find your light and your nourishment in the scriptures. Did you find scriptures that address this particular situation?
Yes, there was a scripture passage that I believe is read every Eastertide, and it encouraged me. Perhaps, Paul, you would read that for us. You'll find it in Acts. Acts 5.
And what verse is that?
It's 5:17 to 20.
Oh, yeah. This passage in the book of Acts of the Apostles recounts an incident where the company of disciples, Jesus' apostles, this was after his resurrection, have been witnessing to Jesus and his resurrection in the temple precincts, and they are apprehended by the religious authorities for causing trouble. And it goes this way. It says in verse 17, the high priest and all his supporters, that is, the party of the Sadducees, filled with jealousy, arrested the apostles and threw them into public jail. During the night, however, an angel of the Lord opened the gates of the jail and led them forth and said, go out now and take your place in the temple precincts and preach to the people all about this new life. Accordingly, they went into the temple at dawn and resumed their teaching. So when the high priest and his supporters arrived, they convoked the entire Sanhedrin, the full council of the elders of Israel. They sent word to the jail that the prisoners were to be brought in. At that, the captain went off with the guard and brought them in, but without any show of force, for fear of being stoned by the crowd. When they had led the apostles in and made them stand before the Sanhedrin, the high priest began the interrogation in this way: "We gave you strict orders not to teach about the name of Jesus, yet you have filled Jerusalem with your teaching and are determined to make us responsible for that man's blood." To this, Peter and the apostles replied, "Better for us to obey God than men."
That was certainly an important sentence. But what meant the most to me that particular day was during the night, however, an angel of the Lord opened the gates of the jail, led them forth, and said, "Go out now and take your place in the temple precincts and preach to the people all about this new life." And it was like I was hearing that the doors will be opened and I will be told to go out and take my place, wherever it was, and live the life that would be my preaching. So I wrote, "This is your word of comfort for me, love. If I could have but a week of days like today," and this was the end of that same day, "I might begin to come alive again. Except for a brief conversation after Mass, I was on my own and alone. I got out for a walk after lunch. It was cold and gray and windy, so I'm aching like I'm being hit with rubber bands. I worked on the quilt and I listened to a Christology course on tape. At the same time, I was trying to formulate how I can tell Father Tim," that was my Jesuit director, who I was to see the next day, "all that had happened. This latter seems either so simple or so complex. I shy away from it. I know where I am, but not why I'm here. I know where I want to go, but not how to get there. The 3 months at Ansted live in me like a moving stream of memory, joy, freedom, and desire to be re-immersed in it as soon as possible. That is mingled with the despairing awareness that it's going to be a long time and a lot of hassle before I'm again alone in my solitary place. I'm developing a plan to drive back to Ansted after a few weeks with perhaps my friend Mary Kay and pick up my stuff that I left there and take 4 or 5 days to do it, and then stop at Spencer on my way back, so that whoever goes with me will have a chance for retreat, and I will have a desperately needed time of refreshment along Mill Creek. Will that work out, love? I already hinted at it in a letter to Sister Gert. I'm truly hanging by my thumbs until I hear from Rock whether I even dare be hopeful about Hazard or not."
Well, allowing things to happen is very much at the heart, it seems. And again, this is something we've pondered together many, many times.
Mm-hmm.
The difference between taking matters into our own hands, how much of that, and how much to simply allow the Lord to do. You know, it wasn't it's fascinating in the account that you wanted to, the part of that episode in Acts of the Apostles that you zeroed in on it was the angel who opened the gates.
Yes.
It wasn't Peter and the apostles who mugged the jailer and stole the keys in order to get out.
No.
It was the angel of the Lord who opened the doors and told them what to do and where to go.
Yes.
And for all of us, the temptation is to engineer our own success, engineer our own achievement, engineer the realization of our goals. On one level, they're all very good things. Being proactive, being assertive, pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. All of those expressions that we use for people, for the human endeavor. But there is also comes that moment and that time where we have to discern when to simply allow God to be God. And especially in the eremitic life, this is especially what hermits are called to, is to, and we've said it in a kind of a joking way before when we spoke about the features of eremitic life, that it's not simply doing something, it's just being there and allowing God to work through you. So you had been anticipating this session with Father Tim. How did that go?
Well, it went very well, and I wrote about it the following evening.
Mm-hmm.
And this I felt was a pretty good summary. Mary Kay and I drove up to Cleveland, Ohio, which was about an hour from Canton, where we were. And she dropped me off at St. Ignatius, where I had my meeting with Father Tim. And it was great. He asked penetrating questions, such as, what did I like best about the 3 months? And I hesitated a little, but went for the truth. Freedom to be myself. And he asked, how is it back in community? And I said, well, it's great to see the sisters, but yucky as far as groupiness goes.
That's a technical religious expression, yucky?
Yeah, it's very understandable in when it's taken in where it belongs.
Mm.
And he asked, I did say, I do want to be there. He asked, what would I do if I only got 2 years exclaustration? I'd take it. 1 year. Take it. If I were refused, I'd reluctantly have to leave the order so as to be true to my deepest self. For it felt wrong to stay in a community only because a law compelled me. Then he asked, am I indifferent? And that's a technical word used in discernment that shows that are you willing to go wherever, whenever, God? And he said, are you indifferent? Are you seeking the Lord's will? If I felt the Lord saying, stay, yes, I'd do it. But I feel he's saying, become a solitary, and that's where life seems to be for me. Tim was pleased with my willingness to accept the bishop's decision and not come in by the back door, such as going to Spencer would be without telling him. What would I do if exclaustration came through, but all possibilities had closed doors? I think I'd go away to a house of prayer, and I'd search from there for a hermitage. For it's too hard to stay on in the monastery indefinitely and not get re-involved in life there. How does my abbess feel? She doesn't want me to go, but she doesn't want to stand in way of the discernment I'm making, and she is willing to assist me with a car and so forth. But in her heart she wishes I wouldn't go. Tim says to me, all the data is in, including the experience of living hermit life, and discernment as such is over. The question was, should I remain in community or become a hermit? And it is answered. Everything points to God is calling me to hermit life. The practical questions will resolve themselves in God's own time. And I commented, wow, it's great to have this unequivocal approbation from someone like Father Tim. He even said that if he had any reservations at all, even if they were just on the feeling level, he would have conveyed these to me, but he has none. So all that is left is to find the place which you have prepared for me. It's strange how I can be so sure and secure in this decision, while all the practicals are up in the air. And to have someone like Tim see this as so right. So I'm waiting, love, hoping against hope that the Bishop of Lexington will be willing to give me a chance. Lord, you know how much stretching of hope that I can bear.
And isn't that wonderful that God does know?
Sometimes you think he overestimates you.
But God knows better than we ourselves know. It's strange to say, but in those kinds of experiences, we're too close to the experience to know what our limitations really are. Last year, about this time, Karen and I began a series on eremitic life, in which we used a work that we had published several years ago entitled Consider the Ravens. And we talked about many of the features and many facets of eremitic life. And we spent a good bit of time discussing the need for solid discernment and what that process looked like. And I just have to say, after listening to you summarize that final interview with Father Tim and all of that, that there's probably no better, more eloquent expression for the value of a good discernment process than what the account you have just given to us. Because so often in our discernments, we can feel very certain, very addressed directly by the divine. We can feel deeply called within our hearts, and yet so much on the practical level, so much on the cerebral level, can look impossible to overcome. It can look like it's all pointing in the opposite direction, and yet we know the truth of that central core insight in our hearts while all these other things are whirling around saying no. And it can be a very confusing time that can even make us doubt the validity of that core insight. We can sometimes be led to believe that, well, if all these other things are making it impossible and are pointing in other directions, then obviously, or maybe I was mistaken. Maybe God really wasn't saying that, because if God had been saying that, well, I wouldn't be faced with all these roadblocks and all these closed doors. But that's not necessarily true. And it takes the willingness to travel with an experienced guide who can feed back to a person that experience in order for them to really judge the truth and the certainty of a discernment as important as this one in this life.
I was blessed in the guides I had, and they certainly gave me a degree of trust in myself that I needed then. So we want to thank you for walking with us through this process, allowing us to share it with you. And we suggest that you stay with us. Can tune in next week for the next exciting adventure as how Karen finds a hermitage. And if you wish to contact us, you can go to our website, www.ravensbreadministries.com, all one word, all lower case, and use the Contact Us page. Or you can email us directly at pkfredette@frontier.com. We want to say thank you for the numbers of you who have contacted us.
Yes.
Or have responded to us on our blog. The blog is attracting some very insightful and interesting comments. And that would be the same as the website, www.ravensbreadministries.com, add /blog.
Again, all in lowercase letters and altogether no spaces. As always, we'd like to take the last few minutes of our presentation with you this evening to spend some time in quiet prayer. And in recent months, Ted Loder, in his great book, Guerrillas of Grace, has been providing us with some wonderful, deep, penetrating, prayerful insights. And we wish again this evening to bring to you one of his very, very beautiful and timely prayers. Sometimes, Lord, it just seems to be too much. Too much violence, too much fear, too much of demands and problems, too much of broken dreams and broken lives, too much of stale routines and quarrels, too much of turned away backs and yellow silence, red rage, and the bitter taste of ashes in our mouths. Too much of darkness, Lord. Too much of uncertainty, doubt, closed doors. Too much cruelty and selfishness and indifference. Or is it too little, too little of compassion, too little of courage, of daring, of persistence, of sacrifice, too little of music and laughter and celebration. O God, make of us some nourishment for these starved times, some food for our brothers and sisters who are so very hungry for gladness and hope, that being bread for them, we may also be fed and be full. Once again, we want to take this opportunity to thank you for being with us this evening as we continue in this series, A Hermit's Journal. We wish you God's peace and good night.
God be with you.